Hello and welcome to the Reuters Institute's first Global Journalism Seminar of the new academic year. We have a fresh room full of new journalist fellows downstairs and an exciting lineup of speakers for our webinar series that aims to foster a global conversation about journalism with and for journalists. And I can't think of a bigger story or a better guest to kick off our year with than Natalia Viana, the co-founder and co-director of Agência Pública, the first non-profit investigative news agency in Brazil. Natalia is an award-winning investigative journalist and author, president of the Brazilian Association of Digital Journalism, and a Nieman Fellow who joins us live from Sao Paulo 3 days after one of the most consequential general elections in the history of Brazil. Bem-vinda, Natalia.
Thank you very much for having me. I am super humbled and thankful for this opportunity to talk to you.
It's great. It's great to have you. What's the mood like in Sao Paulo at the moment?
It depends who you ask.
Good answer.
So I guess if you're asking for journalists, the mood is not very good. The mood is not very good because even though polls predicted that Lula would win the first round, which he did, the polls were showing that Bolsonaro would have much less support than he had. The final numbers were about 48-50 against 43-50%. And this shows for us journalists who have been repeatedly attacked in a way that had never happened in the Brazilian history, that either the public doesn't care or is not aware of the reducing democratic space that's happening in Brazil. I am an investigative journalist from Brazil, but I report a lot in Latin America. I have many friends, and I'm also in the board of the Gabriel Garcia Marques Foundation. So I've seen exactly the same thing happen in many other countries. I've seen the same thing happen in Venezuela, the same thing happen in Nicaragua, the same thing happen in Honduras, in El Salvador now. And it's the journalists are on the front line, and they're the first ones to feel the heat when there is an autocrat who is trying to grab more power. So every serious journalist in Brazil knows that this is what Bolsonaro wants, but it seems that the majority of the society, or at least 43% of the society, is not aware of the threat that democracy is facing right now. So the mood for journalists have been repeatedly abused and threatened and harassed is not very good. But so basically what happened in this election was that the polls showed that Lula was ahead, but also other left-wing or democratic candidates were ahead in many government cities, but also for the Senate. And this is considered a big win for Bolsonaro because even though the polls were showing the opposite, he managed to elect a big amount of senators. I think he elected 5 or 6 who were his ministers, were very associated with himself personally. He elected a bunch of governors, and the largest state in population and wealth, which is São Paulo, which has been a resistance for the Bolsonarism wave. Actually, his candidate, who is completely new to politics in São Paulo, is way ahead of Lula's candidate. So it was a big win overall for Bolsonaro, not even if he is behind in the presidential race, but he has established himself, he himself and his political view as a political force in Brazil. And at the same time, the problem with the polls is a very serious one because Brazil, much like the US, I don't know what is the situation in the UK right now, but is seeing a wave of negationist, feelings in society, and having institutes that work with science and mathematics be really wrong, can really affect how people view institutes in general, polling, and etc. So
Evidence.
I'm sorry if I was too long.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I actually want to go more into that. But before we do, can I ask, for those who might not be familiar with the political system, what does a runoff mean? What happens over the next 30 days? Or less than 30, fewer than 30 days?
So basically, in Brazil, we don't have a queen. We also elect our government directly. So it's one man, one vote. We vote for president and governors in the first round, and also Senate and Congress. If none of the leading candidates in the presidential election, in the presidential poll, gets more than 50%, then we have a second round. And this happens for president, but it also happens for government. So there is, I think, another 9 governors running for the second round, and then Bolsonaro and Lula, which, I mean, it's almost like a tie because it's 48 to 43. So it's going to be the next, we have now 30 days, less than 30 days. We have 25 days for the second round. And it's going to be very tight, whatever the result is.
And it's presidential and 9 governor positions out of how many governor positions?
It's about 24 total. Let me guess how many governor. Well, anyways, it's around 9. It's around, it's around 9 or 10. I can get you the precise data. I don't have.
No, don't worry. We're good.
But I mean, there is still, like, São Paulo, the largest state, is still going to have a second round, and then it's campaigning all over again. It's campaigning in the streets, trying to get allies. There is electoral programs on TV, on radio. So it's a new election.
It's a whole brand new campaign.
It's a brand new campaign.
Do you think, back to the polls that you were talking about, do you think the inaccuracy of the polls benefited either party? Do you think it maybe made potential Lula voters stay home, or potential Bolsonaro voters stay home, or be more likely to go to the polls?
Let me just first ask you the number of states. So the number of states that in which the governor was elected was 14, and there is 12 that are going to have a second round.
So a lot, the majority then.
What I think, I'm not sure if it's about the inaccuracy of the polls. There is a lot of debate. Okay, so Bolsonaro's congressmen who were very close to Bolsonaro, his leaders in Congress, wants to start a parliamentary inquiry against the polls, and the justice minister has requested an investigation against the institute. So this is the kind of, Chavez-like discourse that we're seeing here.
Right.
I think polls always influence elections. I think it could go either way, right? So we have no idea. So Lula was very much ahead, and the polls were showing he had 50% of the vote, or 50 or 51. So, I mean, people could have decided to vote for him, and then they decided to vote for Bolsonaro, which is basically what happened. Was that there were 2 candidates that were much smaller. They had 5% each. And then, the voters of this candidate decided to vote for Bolsonaro. They could have decided for Lula. I mean, either you agree that there must be polls, or you agree that there must not be polls, but, sometimes polls can get it wrong. And they do affect the votes, but I guess they also bring information for people to decide.
And I'm also quite fascinated that by a project that Agência Pública has undertaken. I know this has been a fairly violent campaign season. Can you tell us a little bit about your project to track violence? And I know you're not our fortune teller, but do you think that this trend will continue? Is there concern around violence in this interim period?
Yes, I'm a very bad storyteller, as I was telling you before. Everything I predicted. Storyteller, so a future teller, not storyteller. I am a good storyteller, I hope. So everything I've predicted since 2013, it was wrong. So don't take my word for anything. But this is not a fortune teller. This is reality. With Bolsonaro's comeback, with Bolsonaro's big splash in 2018, electoral violence has become effect in Brazilian society.
Mm.
It is not, I mean, if you consider that Brazil has 210 million people, it is still, isolated events here and there. So in this first round of the elections, we have counted 150 events that included violence. They include attacks. They include really, really violent events such as shootings and stabbing. This exists. However, many of them are also, people just, being verbally violent against each other, and et cetera, et cetera. We do not count death threats, and we do not count internet violence, that is completely widespread. But the reason we do this is because this did not happen in Brazil at all until 2018. There was not, this was not a part of our elections, and now it is. And the reason it is because Bolsonaro doesn't have really, or he doesn't lay out very clearly what is his vision for the country, but he lays out very clearly what he is against. So his entire following is based on hatred and the will to exterminate a certain fraction of society. It changes, he modulates his discourse from time to time, but basically, it's leftists, communists, LGBTQI+, feminists, progressives in general. In this way, I mean, his discourse is very, very similar to Donald Trump in the US. And he talks about eliminating them. He has been saying this. And when you want to erase another political force, when you send these kinds of messages, when you are aggressive and violent yourself, basically you just, you're sending the message that anybody can do this. So people who are, more violent, people who are more unstable, they just go and do it. So we've seen episodes that were really bad. We've seen, shootings, we've seen people being stabbed. There was this horrible event in the Northeast in which a guy arrived in a bar and said, "Who is a Lula supporter?" And this woman said, "Yay." He stabbed her.
Wow. And
killed her. So this is the kind of thing we're seeing in Brazil. And it is all, I think it's very important because it all stems from a violent political discourse. And we know that words lead to actions, and we know that words are being spread through social media. So people who are like old days kind of politicians and leaders still say, "Oh no, it's just words," but it isn't. It's making our society more violent.
Well, is the opposition doing anything to counter that rhetoric? And is there any way to counter that rhetoric?
There is a lot of debate. I mean, the opposition has denounced it again and again. And I mean, it has denounced it in courts, and it has denounced it, to the police. One of the articles we published recently is about, all the candidates that had to go around doing campaign with security guards, which are, and this is a new reality in Brazil. This didn't exist in the past. And the whole Lula campaign in the beginning, until I think a week ago or now is a bit worse, it tried to focus on a positive message, on uniting the country, getting rid of poverty and hunger, of imagining a future that could be. And of course, this has had some success because he was ahead in polls. He has 5 million votes more than Bolsonaro, but his votes had been down for a while, had gone down a little bit, and then he went up again. But so he had some success, but I don't think he was capable of containing either the violence in the speech or, the effects on the streets. And then they've started to actually also being, a little bit more aggressive, just bringing up stories about Bolsonaro's corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So so the entire debate has been tainted by this aggressiveness. But also, I don't think Bolsonaro, I think Bolsonaro is the most genuine person you will find. I think this is how he functions.
Right.
This is who he is, and he cannot, like, it's really hard for him to not be aggressive and violent. So we had an episode that was extremely shocking. They were in a debate on TV, on national TV, and a journalist asked the question, a woman journalist, female journalist, and he abused her verbally, like out of nowhere, because of a question in front of everybody. So this is the kind of person we're dealing with. So I don't think much. I think this is his rhetoric. If it's presently in societies, applauded, there's very little that you can do as an opposition party, I think.
I have to ask, in this tracker, I'm assuming you're tracking the political ideology of aggressor and victim. Is it exclusively Bolsonaro supporters who are being violent, or is there violence from both sides?
There is a little bit of violence from both sides. So the numbers that we're publishing a story in a couple of hours, which I haven't seen the final figures. So the story we published in last Friday, we managed to record and check 75 cases of violence. Out of these 75 cases, more than 57%, we could not state clearly who the attacker supporter. But 36% were Bolsonaro supporters and 9% were Lula supporters.
Okay.
So you can see that there is some violence from the Lula supporters, but 3 times more, almost four times more, come from Bolsonaro.
Is it possible that data is a little bit skewed because of the types of audience that engage with your work?
I think it could be a little bit skewed, but I think if there were cases of violence against Bolsonaro supporter, the Bolsonaro networks would make a huge fuss about this.
Okay.
And I mean, our audience is left-leaning, definitely, but we are also monitoring for our misinformation project. We monitor a lot of Bolsonaristas' private messaging groups and also social networks. So basically what I read most of my day is what they think. And really there aren't many. There isn't many report of it. So the way we capture this data is we have a questionnaire on our website. We spread it through our social media. We also follow the news. So newspapers from all over Brazil that are reporting on this. And we also follow social media. People who follow us and people who don't follow us. So yeah, these are the cases that we could get to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So did you say 36% versus 9%?
Yes.
Yeah. I saw a picture on your website of, I believe Duda is the name of the politician, a trans politician, surrounded by 6 or 7 security guards, bodyguards. Is that normal?
Yeah, so that is not normal, but it is becoming more normal, and it is becoming more normal specifically for groups of LGBTQI+, Indians, feminists who are very identified with the progressive causes, because the Bolsonaro's vision of the world is violent, and it is violent against these minorities. So more and more these people are receiving threats, and they start on social media, but then they can get attacked on the street. So they really need a lot of bodyguards now. They really need to be protected. And the same happened to Lula, which was a big loss, because Lula is a popular leader. He likes being amongst people, but he has needed to use protection and even like an anti-bullet kind of vest. He couldn't do like open air events out of fear that there would be violence against him. This, of course, damages the entire.
Everyone loses.
The entire elections, everyone loses, and it's not normal. So this electoral campaign is not normal for a democracy. I was thinking about this. So if a Bolsonarista even, one of the aspects that is important to know is that apart from being violent in his discourse, Bolsonaro supports guns, and he supports violence with guns in many ways, in very, very much the same way that Trump does. So, you have to defend yourself, you have to defend your honor, your family, etc., etc. Very geared towards men. And he has changed the law and has allowed for the guns in the hands of civilians to increase to threefold during his 4 years in government. So right now there is 3 times more guns in people's hands, and there is no limit to how many guns people can have. Anyway. So this is a disaster in a country that is already violent.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it in the way that in the US you can kind of draw a line from political funding from the NRA to the politicians who are most outspoken? Is there any kind of line to be drawn to Bolsonaro in terms of campaign funding?
Yeah, there is campaign funding from armed groups, and there is from arm manufacturers, but also from groups that profit from because it's a whole industry. So right now there is like shooting rings, né?
How they're called? Shooting ranges.
Shooting ranges, yes. They're being open all over the country, and basically these are like the barber shops, but for people who love guns, right? These are people where manly men hang out, and it supports a kind of machismo, violent identity, and these are being opening all over Brazil, and they're profiting from this new. This newfound Brazilian man who is a macho and can have a gun. But what I was saying is, like, if a Bolsonarista shoots if a pro-Bolsonaro person is very angry and shoots a petista person who dies, nobody wins. Bolsonaro doesn't win because he's, heavily affected by the vision that his campaign is violent. Lula, of course, doesn't win because Lula's people get afraid. The only ones who win are the people who sold the guns.
Yeah. Before we all start getting too depressed, let me give you something else to be depressed about. Another feature of this campaign cycle, arguably all campaign cycles everywhere now, has been misinformation.
Yeah.
And can you tell us some of the key misinformation tactics that you've tracked in this election cycle?
So before we get to the press, I'm going to tell you the what is happening yesterday, so that all of us can have a laugh.
Oh, good.
So one of
give us some comedic relief.
Yeah, absolutely, because there is that, right? And they use comedy as well. So in the preview in the last month, Bolsonaro's campaign has associated Lula with the devil, and there has been rumors that he has a pact with the devil. And yesterday, Lula put out a fact checking, which was absolutely hilarious. He said, Lula does not believe in the devil. Lula believes in God. And then he said, Lula has never spoken with the devil. Lula does not have a pact with the devil. And then the final one is like, Lula's main proposal is to regain the economy and eliminate hunger, because it feels like they wanted to insert something serious since somebody's reading about the devil, right? But then it gets worse, because then a lot of Lula supporters, I don't know how it started, but some people who are very close to his campaign started spreading a video of Bolsonaro in a masonry temple, right? And wow. This is a real video, but then they started showing this, and the whole thing blew out of proportion, and now everybody's talking about who actually has a pact with the devil. Is it Lula? Is it Bolsonaro? Because Bolsonaro is close to the masonry. So this is what we are discussing right now. I'm giving it I'm giving it some time before we, actually
Wow.
start covering misinformation right now, because I think right now everybody's just, completely confused. So I'm going to give it a couple.
It's disturbing because there are so many very important things that Brazilians need to be discussing, like the impact of these election results for climate change and the impact for the economy and the cost of living crisis. And people are running around talking about who's got a pact with the devil. It's
Exactly. This is today's topic. There is it's crazy. And it's great. I mean, for us journalists observing a cultural phenomena, which stems from the social media and the end of the monopoly on debate by the mainstream media. It's fascinating to see, because actually people are super interested in reading these kinds of things, and they want to discuss these kinds of things. They want to discuss it if Bolsonaro is a Mason or not. And on the other hand, some of these other issues are harder to communicate, and because campaigns, they track everything that works and everything that don't work. I mean, Lula has a very interesting, very good government plan that has published, and he says that he's going to go back to protecting the Amazon. While Lula was in government, they managed to reduce deforestation a lot. He has also promised to inaugurate a minister of Indian communities, Indian nations, for the first in the history of Brazil. We do have a huge community of indigenous peoples some of which haven't been contacted. I mean, this is a cultural richness that is huge. Brazil has never had an indigenous ministry, but I guess this don't fly. So, I mean, it's, of course, the campaign should be, and is trying to, that's why they put like the economy as the last item, but that's where the debate is happening. This is how the debate is happening. So I think there is a lot of, the fact that people, there is a statement of facts. People are interested in this kind of things. This is one fact. And campaigns go after what people are interested in discussing. There is another fact. Algorithm and social media support this kind of thing. They promote this kind of bullshit, sorry about the language, debates, right? So they foment, and they make them larger, they make them reach more people, and more people engage. So the infrastructure that we have in which the public discourse is happening supports these kinds of debates, and this is a huge problem.
Do you think the average Brazilian is aware of the rest of the world watching very anxiously about climate change? Do you think they're aware of how important these results are to the climate crisis, or do you think they've got other things to worry about, like pacts with the devil?
I think they have other things to worry about, and it's not the pacts with the devil. And I don't think Brazilians know that the rest of the world is watching. I think sometimes it's on the news. So sometimes, when Bolsonaro went to the burial of the Queen, it was on the news, and then there was, the fact that it was a huge embarrassment was communicated a bit. But Brazil is very similar to the US as well in this sense, because Brazil is very big. Brazilians are very insular, they're very internal focused, and our media is like that as well. I mean, the amount of coverage of the world outside of Brazil is very small, and a huge amount on politics and social issues. But what I think they're mostly concerned about, and this is interesting when we debate social media, people are really interested about their kids going to school and eating, and because of the huge economic crisis that is happening all over the world, everybody's really interested in the inflation, and are they going to get jobs, and etc. So this is what they are interested. This is what is their daily concerns. On one side. On the other side, Brazilians, it has been shown again and again and again, are very conservatives, and they are saying with a lot of, they're fretting a lot about these new waves of cultural shift in which the traditional family is, evaporating. You know, there is different kinds of sexualities being expressed. There is a huge shift in the traditional hierarchical, you know, social classes system. There's much more Black people ascending to middle class. So they get Brazilians. My husband is Dutch. He says, I'm very traditional. I think we're all as a society very traditional. Just are scared of change. And this change is happening. It's not going to go back. So there is a lot of fear. And what I think is with the hatred, this is what Bolsonaro is very smartly capturing, the fear of change.
I want to invite people to put questions for Natalia into the Q&A box, and to our fellows downstairs to feel free to put questions into WhatsApp. So if you see me looking away, that's what I'm looking at, your questions. But Natalia, we do have a question here for you from an anonymous attendee who says, could you please expand on religious disinformation, especially in the evangelical community?
Oh, that's a great question.
I'm
going to answer this question. Then there's something, because I want to say something positive as well.
Good.
So basically, the evangelical churches have spread in Brazil over the last 20 years a lot, and they started basically just gathering a lot of members by being very outspoken about material gain, being very outspoken about it is okay for you to want money. It's
prosperity
okay
gospel.
The prosperity gospel.
Gotcha.
And not only that, you know, in a state that is in a nation that is this huge, which is a state that is still very deficient, they provided community, they provided care for people, and they provided somewhere hope and somewhere people could go to, really. I mean, if you go to the favelas, there's nothing to do. You can, you know, go to the bar, go to the church, basically. So they provided community, and they told people it's okay to want, you know, gain and etc. So it was, you know, it was also fun. There is a lot of prayer, there's a lot of, you know, rituals that happen there. But the problem, so they started gaining a lot of money, a lot of power. And about 15 years ago, there was this one church, the Universal Kingdom of God, is present in the US as well. Its leader decided it's time for us to gain political power. So he founded a party. He started putting his pastors and bishops up for election. And now we have so many pastors and bishops. We have like an evangelical caucus in Congress, and they are very powerful. They have allied themselves with Bolsonaro from the beginning. Bolsonaro is married to an evangelical woman who is she's a huge believer. She is kind of a priestess as well, but she doesn't, but she speaks like one. And they are, all of them have decided to support Bolsonaro. So the way they're supporting Bolsonaro is, first of all, so we, Agência Pública, we not only monitor the evangelical kind of WhatsApp groups, but we also go to churches quite a lot, you know, to see what is being talked about. We've registered and published many cases of, you know, electoral crime in which there is actually, you know, pastors saying you should vote for this or that. But mainly what they do is they demonize, and I mean demonize really, they demonize whatever is lefty, and they say that whatever is lefty is actually communism. And of course, and then there is the whole thing about the pact with the devil, which is, you know, crazy. But also one huge misinformation that spread right in the beginning of the elections was that Lula was going to persecute Christians and close the churches, which is complete bullshit. I'm sorry about.
No, please don't. Please feel free to use any word you like.
Okay, because anyway, because he was a governor, he was a president for 2 mandates. Dilma was, I mean, these people are Democrats. They're not gonna close anything. They're gonna compose a government if they win. But yeah, this really caused a huge fear. So again, using the fear in a moment of economic crisis and cultural shift that is making everybody insecure to, gather support for Bolsonaro.
I want to go live to the room downstairs and ask Leda from Zambia. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me right?
We can hear you.
So you mentioned that there's a lot of abuse and a lot of journalists are being threatened. I wanted to find out what you're doing to ensure that journalists from your publications are protected from the violence that's going on. And then secondly, I also want to know, because you mentioned that Brazil never experienced such violence until 2018. What role are journalists playing to restore the peace that existed before 2018? Thank you.
Do you get that, Natalia?
Yes, I did.
Great.
I think I did. So it's how we're protecting our people and how journalists are acting to restore peace.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
Very good questions. So the first question is, okay, so back in 2018, it was the first time my team was attacked. They were attacked online. There was a doxing campaign. Some Bolsonaro supporters prepared a dossier, and they used the social media of all of my team to say that, we're communists, we're supported by George Soros, we're part of this international conspiracy that wants to curtail freedoms, or, all the same stories that are being spread in the US, and I'm sure in the UK as well. When that happened, it affected the mental health of my team enormously. And I think back then that I don't think I was good enough in leading the team to get past this. So what we did back then is we sat down with everybody and we started having protocols about exposure on social media, personal accounts and professional accounts. We started having protocols about how do you approach people to ask for comments, because we were starting to ask for comments and they would dox us. They would just, expose, the request. So we needed to create neutral accounts that were not personal accounts. So we did all of that. We did training of digital security with our people. And then during the pandemic, we started having a psychoanalyst come and have a round table to discuss, the mental stress that everybody was feeling. These things have been tried again and again and again in different newsrooms. They have, variable, results. Some people like it, enjoy it, and make use of it. Some people, don't want it. Some people are more open, some people are not. But in general, I can say that my people are much more conscious about the risks, and they are much more cautious on social media. We've written and published a guide of security for field reporting, because we do a lot of reporting in the Amazon. And as I've seen with the very sad case of Don Phillips, it's more and more dangerous to be there. So we now have much more rigid protocols. We have not had any serious attack on our people.
I want to, while you're speaking about that, I just want to bring up the report that you recently did for the Neiman Fellowship, where you said community leaders, when trying to talk about environmental damage, are discredited based on how they talk, the color of their skin, or their culture. What do you think needs to change in Brazilian newsrooms to get these voices heard in the mainstream media?
So this is a historical problem, and I have to say this has gotten much better with Bolsonaro in the last, because the fact is, okay, so Agência Pública was built on the premise we are an I didn't even talk about Agência Pública. I can talk about it. Agência Pública is an investigative agency. Our primary focus is human rights issues, because Brazil is a very unequal society in many aspects. But because we have always covered human rights violations, our sources have always been sources on the ground, Brazil doesn't have a very strong state, especially in like more, remote areas such as the Amazon. So for us to do good investigative reporting, we have to listen to social leaders, and they are the people who know what's happening on the ground. Meanwhile, mainstream media, which are mostly based in São Paulo or Rio, the richest parts of the country, they tended to listen much more, they still tend actually to listen to much more to official voices, so government somewhere or police somewhere. And these people are the people who are not necessarily, they don't know what's going on, but they're also allied with the the economic forces that quite often are trying to, are committing violence against these people. The reason they didn't believe in the social leaders is because of prejudice, because of class prejudice, because these people don't speak properly, proper, grammatically correct Portuguese, because these people are darker, because these people are indigenous, because these people, they are not well read, they must not know what they think. So that article that I wrote about the Neiman report was actually saying that this is not just the case of Brazil, case of the international media, and it has been so forever. Not only in Brazil, but Latin America, the way our social movements have been portrayed is appalling. I remember how Evo Morales was ridiculed when he went to meet the king of Spain because he was wearing a traditional vest from the indigenous communities. There is still this colonial vision of the world in which these people are, backwards, underdeveloped, and one day they'll get to our level. And this reflects in the way that these issues are being covered. But if we're talking about the future of humanity with the preservation of the largest forest in the world, which is in Brazil, you have to respect the ones who live there and the ones who know what's going on there and the ones who have fought their entire lives to preserve it. It's because when you talk, there is this person, they are a community leader. The only thing they want is to stay there and, preserve the forest around. And then this person is never portrayed in the same way that, I don't know, an industrialist, somebody who is well-read and went to Harvard or Oxford, that person, white male, that person is listened to much more.
Right. So when you say Bolsonaro has helped bring those voices forward a bit more, say a little bit more about that.
It is not Bolsonaro at all, sorry. And this comes to the question that was asked before. What happened to the media? So the media was not only attacked constantly in the Bolsonaro government, but the media is also monitoring the whole dismantling that is happening in the safeguards of our democracy. So there were dozens of councils, say boards that overviewed different policies. They were all disbanded. This was the way that organized civil society would have some say in the government. The government has been filled with military officers. So there's over 6,000 military officers working in government. The reason Bolsonaro does that is because he doesn't want confrontation. He wants people who follow his orders. And of course, this is anti-democratic. There has been persecution of public servants, especially in the institutes and autarkies that protect the environment and Indians. So we published a story about there was an Excel table in which each one of the directors of FUNAI, of the Indigenous National Foundation, and on the side of the name of the director, he was saying if he was pro or against Bolsonaro, and the ones that were against Bolsonaro, sometimes it was written, substitute him for a military guy. So this is clear, persecution of people who don't think like Bolsonaro. So we journalists have been reporting on this and seeing how and of course he has attacked the Supreme Court. He's one of his main pleas if he gets re-election is that he's gonna increase the Supreme Court and then he's gonna be able to put more ministers there. So, basically an autarky, a dictatorship. A light dictatorship. Anyway, but we've been reporting on this and we've been seeing what's happening in the country, and the majority of the media in Brazil has been denouncing this and kind of having a very critical stance on the government and become very active, sometimes very active, sometimes it's not biased, but it's taking a stance, being openly critical of what is happening. This, I think, has been much more prominent than an attempt to heal the country and bring peace. And I understand that bringing peace could be the work of journalists, but I don't think this is the moment to do that, because we are under severe threat. And I think right now, and I mean, we are debating this every day. The US has debated it the same. Other countries have debated it. Journalism is one of the walls that can protect democracy. And if it doesn't take a stance in this moment of peril, it would be just much more easy for democracy to die. This is actually what Steve Levitsky, the author of How Democracies Die, this is his stance. So I think more than trying to bring peace right now, we need to investigate and expose and try to show the population that what is happening is not normal, and that our democracy is eroding and we're under a huge threat.
Right. So perhaps not a proactive peacekeeping role, but at least a proactive anti-violence role.
Well, yeah, I mean, the media is not promoting violence at all. That's but I mean, I haven't seen any calls for. There is criticism of violence, but there is no like, okay, let's be calm. We all need to talk. I think this has to be done soon. But it's very hard, because there is one side, as we've shown with data, there is one side that is being violent. So the media is focusing on denouncing that.
I mean, my mind immediately goes to Rwanda and the radio stations when you hear about conditions like this tinderbox. But let me not go off on a tangent, because there are so many questions for you here. So let's do a little rapid fire. Irene Vianini asks, have the actions undertaken by the TSE Superior Electoral Court had a positive impact on the election?
Well, I think, again, what happens is Bolsonaro has such a strong grasp of social media and manipulation of political discourse that he has managed to put the electoral court on guard and in defense. So for a year now, he has been saying that they're thieves, corrupt, and that nothing, that they are actually trying to just guarantee that Lula will win, which is a complete fabrication. And this has caught on to his supporters. Not only that, but he has committed a series of electoral crimes, in the whole campaign, showing that he doesn't follow their rules. And the reason he does that is to undermine the electoral court. So, because then when the electoral court acts against him, he can say he's being persecuted, they are biased, they want Lula to win. So this has put them in a position that is extremely dangerous. They have been tough. They have been probably much more tough than would be reasonable. There were some events, one specifically in which a group of businessmen were discussing how they believe it would be better if there was a coup by the military instead of Lula winning, which is terrible. But there wasn't really a plan going on. It was just people saying these kinds of things. These people have political and financial power, and they were funding protests. They were helping this narrative spread in society. The president of the electoral court ordered that their houses be searched, which is, abusive. It is a step too far. However, in the current moment, with the president that is again and again attacking the court and saying that he's going to call the army for a coup, clearly he's saying this, I think, again, it's a reaction that can be justified. The problem is that the violent speech of Bolsonaro has distorted the entire country. It's not only the people on the street, it's the courts, is the press, is the police, is the military. He has managed to shift everything. Nothing is normal at the moment. Courts are behaving in defense and attack mode. The media is being much more proactive and activist than it would like to be. The police are debating whether or not they should, it's in complete disarray, and he's absolutely the reason why.
And there's a kind of perverse optimism in that, isn't there? That I mean, there's a message here from Stravula in Greece saying, "Thank you for reminding me the importance of journalism at a time like this." And I think that there's something to be said that when institutions actually do what they were designed to do, and when journalists do what they're designed to do, that there's something hopeful about that.
I do think that I've definitely regained my faith in journalism, in the mainstream media, and in the big corporations of Brazil, who have actually stood up against this corrupt force in the corrupt in the meaning that Bolsonaro is corrupting the entire society of Brazil. But I said I wanted to say something positive, and I'm going to. So what we've seen is, if you look at Lula and his political career, he is the most relevant political leader Brazil has had in a century. And it's quite impressive. So this man was accused of corruption, and he was jailed for a year just 2 years ago. It turned out that the whole investigation was biased. The judge was considered biased, and not only he was biased, then he went on to become minister of the Bolsonaro government, and the entire investigation was thrown out against Lula specifically. 2 years later, he is not only running for elections, he is leading the polls. So this is a man who was in jail 2 years ago, suffering an injustice according to our court system, which I believe he was unjustly arrested. So justice was done, and now he's running for president, and he is ahead. This is the stature of this political figure that basically is a popular figure who really wants the poor people of Brazil to get in a better, economical position, and Brazil to be a better voice in the world. So
Sounds
this
like...
has happened. It's something to be applauded, and something to give us hope, even when we see terrible injustice happening. Things can shift, and they can shift very quickly. And then at the same time, in these elections, even with Bolsonaro electing a lot of governors, we did have a lot of congressmen and congresswomen that had historical wins. So for the first time, we're going to have an indigenous woman in Congress, which has never happened. We had about 5 or 6 indigenous who were elected for various positions all over Brazil. We have 2 trans candidates who are going to be in the parliament as well for the first time. So there is also a lot of pretty progressive people who were elected. It means the polarization is happening, but both sides, there is also a push for the progressive side to be heard.
There's a redemption arc, potentially. A redemption arc for Brazil.
I'm not sure there's going to be, I think, in the end, either we fall into an autocracy and, all these people are expelled or go to live, in the UK, or there needs to be conversation. There's a part of society who is very excited about progressive, stances and the cultural revolution that is happening. And there is a part that doesn't want to see it. So they're both going to be in parliament.
Rapid fire, going back into the room to ask Olga from Ukraine for her question.
Oh.
We can't hear you. I think you might be on mute. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, Natalia, and thank you so much for your very interesting talk. And my question is, was Russia's war on Ukraine an issue during the election campaign in Brazil? And also, did you observe any pro-Russian disinformation in Brazil in the campaign and in general?
Thank you so much for your question, and I'm extremely sorry about what's happening in your country. It wasn't a big issue. Both Bolsonaro and Lula have been critical of both sides. Bolsonaro has in a historical shift, our government has not condemned Russia's war, which is a historical shift because Brazil has always been a non-belligerent and has always supported peace in its international approach. In our foreign ministry, so it hasn't been an important. As I told you, Brazil is very inward looking. This doesn't seem to affect the Brazilian debate at all, but it affects how the Americans are seeing it, and that I know, but that's because the Americans always, everything is always about Putin. So I was interviewing very recently Jamie Raskin, who is one of the congressmen who were doing the January 6th investigation, and the reason I went to interview him is because we Agência Pública have established several ties between the people who spread the misinformation about fraud in the American elections and the people who are spreading information about fraud in Brazilian elections, and they communicate, they have meetings, etc. So there is an alliance there. And one of the views that I have, and some academics, some scholars in the US have, is that the US is the larger exporter of misinformation about electoral fraud. And they all say, no, this is all Putin. And I disagree. I think Putin may have his agenda, but no misinformation would spread without American Silicon Valley companies, which do not do enough and profit from misinformation. So I think they're as much to blame as Putin.
Bold. Okay. We're rapidly running out of time, and there are so many questions, and I'm trying to choose what's the most important question to ask you before we go. I really want to hear why you started Agência Pública, because you hinted to me earlier that there was a good story there that needed to be told. So can we try and squeeze in why did you start Agência Pública? And the question that I was going to ask from Yossi was, what happens if Bolsonaro wins?
So we're going to end on a sad note.
Start with the first one.
Okay, that's a good. So if Bolsonaro wins, so Bolsonaro has already his program is not very clear, but we all know what he's going to do. He has said that he wants to put the Supreme Court in its place. So basically, he wants to make it larger so he can elect the majority of the judges. So we're going to have a Supreme Court that basically bows to his wills. He wants to privatize most of the national companies. He wants to reestablish, religion education in Brazil. He wants to militarize the school. He wants to allow people to have guns. He has no regard for public services, so he's not a defender of the public health system. What I think we can see is like a very Venezuela type of decay very rapidly. Venezuela, or you can compare it to Nicaragua. Basically, he already has control, or some control, but he's going to grow if he has control of the Supreme Court. He has control of the parliament, which he has purchased by just giving them a lot of money, billions and billions and billions of public funding. If he controls the Supreme Court, he's going to be free to also, tell the army what to do. And then he wants to shift. Basically, we want to concentrate much more power in his hands. And with that, he can, silence the media, control the civil society, he can cut funding from abroad, which we have also seen in El Salvador. We've seen this in Nicaragua. We've seen this also in Russia, in Ukraine, I guess. So basically, he wants to establish a control over the country. It's going to be an autocracy, I guess. I don't know how long this is going to take. He's going to attack journalists, and we are going to see people fleeing the country. If he wins, we are in a very bad position to defend our democracy. There is some people who believe that our democracy has shown to be strong. I don't see it that way. I think Brazil is big and richer than most countries in Latin America. We've resisted as much as we could, but I also know that we are much worse than we were 4 years ago, and 4 years from now, we're going to be worse even. Now, on a good note, Agência Pública, we know what we have to do. Our role is to defend human rights human rights in Brazil, is to cover violence against women, minorities, is to cover corruption by governments, it is to cover corruption in the judiciary, it is to denounce every attempt to demolish our democracy. So we are going to have a lot of work. Agência Pública was founded 11 years ago, and it was founded in an interesting way because I was invited by Julian Assange to be the person who would coordinate the publication of the American embassy papers in Brazil.
Okay.
He got to me through I had lived in the UK. I went to Goldsmiths College. I took a master's there in 2006. And when I was there, I met Gavin McFadden, who is the founder of the Center for Investigative Journalism.
Right.
Gavin was a very good friend of mine. When Julian Assange asked him if he knew somebody from the South, if he knew somebody from Brazil who was, a professional who could lead and advise him on who to partner up with in Brazil and how to deal with the documents, I was called, and I traveled to, the Frontline Club. I was, a whole
cloak and dagger.
Yeah, exactly. Because Julian Assange is very much like that. So I helped them devise the strategy and publish the documents in Brazil. While I was doing this, I became very famous because I had, the largest scoop in decades in my pocket. And so everybody reached out to me. And at that moment, I decided with my companion, with my partner, Marina Amaral, who is a more senior journalist than me, we decided to use the opportunity of the visibility that I was getting to found an organization that is a bit, that it was before ProPublica was founded, but what's the name of the one? The Bureau had already been founded, and Gavin was the Bureau of Investigative Journalism.
Right.
It had already been founded. So we kind of had that as a reference, and we decided to start an organization that would do investigative journalism, but would focus on human rights violations because of the reasons I already told you. And it was a success. We had no idea it was going to be a success. I thought it was going to die in 6 months, and here we are 11 years from then.
So the moral of the story is make friends with lots of people when you're at university, because you never know when you might end up defending democracy as a result.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I tell you, when I came back from Goldsmiths, I was depressed. I was like, oh, that did not serve me anyway. And it did change my story, but it also changed journalism in Brazil, because since we founded, we have helped dozens of other organizations to start in Brazil.
Thank you, Natalia, so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. I've got about 16,000 more questions for you. I'm so sorry to those of you whose questions I didn't get to. Really fantastic questions. Please join us next week. Mitali, our new director, will be interviewing John Allen Namu from Kenya about the emotional impact of investigative journalism. John had to leave his home with his family after his work on the Panama Papers revealed some less than complimentary information about Kenyatta. And he's just got fascinating insights to share. Natalia, come back often, come and visit us. We'll come and visit you. We'll be thinking of you, and just keep up the fantastic work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Please, please think of Brazil, pray for
We will.
Brazil, and hope that there's no devil in our dispute in any way, that not any of the sides has a pact with the devil. Let's see.
That's the perfect note to end on. Thank you, Natalia. Go well, everyone, and we'll see you next week.